Hi, this is Dr. Tom Moorcroft. Welcome to Full Cup Life, the podcast that goes behind the science of living well to exposing the truths and tactics to savor all that your journey to greater success has to offer to you every sip of the way. Hey, Dr. Roseann, awesome to see you. How's it going?
Hi, Tom. How are you? Always good. You know, you and I, we're always positive.
That's right. And yeah, so guys, you're in for a good one today. Dr. Rowe and I are good friends, and we always have a blast and try to look at things a little bit differently. So yeah, Roseann, I mean, there's so many things we could talk about, and there's so many things that we've worked on together. I mean, in my practice, I've seen some of my toughest cases really need sort of another sort of tool in the toolbox and another viewpoint. And that's where we work together a lot. So I was hoping you could tell people kind of a little bit about your background and then a little bit about sort of what's been going on recently in your practice with the whole COVID thing going down.
Yeah, so I am a pediatric mental health expert and a therapist and a psychologist and a mom and all that stuff. And what I do in our center in Ridgefield, Connecticut, is I help thousands of people reverse some of the most chronic issues using proven holistic therapies like neurofeedback, very specific types of psychotherapy, biofeedback, PMF. And we treat everything from Lyme disease and pandas, which is where Dr. Tom and I do a lot of work together, but also autism, anxiety, depression. We work a lot with failure to launch kids, which is this whole group of young adults, 18 and up, who sort of are stuck. They typically have a mental health related issue that sort of has been bubbling the whole time, and then they kind of freeze when they try to enter adulthood. But in our practice during this time of quarantine, we've continued to work with people virtually. Our center is reopened again, so we are working with people one-on-one doing neurofeedback. We are doing some home-based neurofeedback, and we are going to really expand that because there's a need for that as we're sort of preparing, as you like to talk about, sort of this second wave of what's going to happen in this quarantine. I don't believe this is the only time in quarantine, but one of the biggest things that have come out of COVID and the pandemic for me is just noticing how anxious people are to re-enter this world. And so I coined a term called Reentry Panic Syndrome, because what really my first experience with it was not my clients, Tom, it was my employees.
Yeah.
And I was surprised, being a mental health professional, from always planning and thinking in advance. Some of my employees who never had any sort of level of anxiety literally were panicked about the idea of coming back to work. And as that started happening, I just heard it more and more and more. And, Dr. Tom and I live in the Northeast, and we really are very much more of a hotbed of activity for COVID, and the infection rates are much, much higher here. So we live in a different area where there's a lot of fear, legitimate fear, right? And so this worry starts with legitimate fear, Tom, and then really is different than just anxiety, because people still have not left their home. Like, I have met many people that are, almost 3 months in and have almost not left their home, and are unable to, due to panic and worry.
Well, and it's interesting because I've met a lot of these people too, and they're asking me what I'm doing. I'm like, well, I'm just kind of doing what I do. I mean, I take care of myself, and we all talk a lot about what we can do to support our health, so that because we're all going to get exposed. And I guess I'm wondering, why do you think this is happening? Because to me, it's like, the reality is, if anybody, I mean, and I think it's all across the TV, and maybe it's been buried or something, but the reality is that we're all going to get exposed to this at some point.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you and I, we're pretty positive that we've had asymptomatic COVID. I just can't imagine with our travels we weren't exposed.
Right. And well, I mean, in early February, I mean, I had a fever and a flu-like illness with a cough and like all kinds of stuff I've never had since, I can't remember the last time I had a fever. Probably was when I was in high school or middle school. So, right. But, why is it so different? I mean, is it the fact
I
that people?
think such a great question, actually, and nobody's asked me that, Dr. Tom, and I have really thought about why it's different. It's different because people have been isolated. They have been away from other people. They have been holed up at home. And for some people, it's been a positive thing. You know, you and I have done a lot of really cool things during this
Right,
time, right? I wrote 3 books and did a bunch of other things. But when you isolate and you're not connecting, we are social beings and we need connection. We need social connection, we need physical connection. And I think when you are staying away from people, the first part of it was just a tremendous amount of anxiety. And then people found sort of a rhythm and a new normal. And then what I saw was the effects of isolation and that there was some level of depression and whatnot. So for a lot of reasons, and I've seen scenarios with reentry panic syndrome where there's valid concern that there's somebody in their home that is extremely high risk. So
mm-hmm,
they don't want to be the person bringing the illness into a high risk person. But the majority of the anxiety, the cases of anxiety with reentry panic syndrome are people where that's not the case. And so that social isolation builds fear. And so, you know, what I talked about in our reps protocol is to approach it very slowly and to expose yourself, right? So you've been inside for months, and truly, like we said, we've met people where they really have not gone anywhere. They're getting grocery deliveries. They've never
right.
left their home. And what does that do? That isolation builds the fear, the anxiety. They need to take a step to get out, right? And do something that they're most comfortable with. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable, but you have to start somewhere and then test the waters, right?
Well,
And so, go ahead.
I was just going to say though, you know, one of the things that comes up over and over, and there's a lot of stuff with, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement right now, and like how it's just, you know, we've got this medical misinformation out there. We've got racism coming to the forefront of our conversations. And all of these are things that need to be addressed, but we have to be, it feels like we have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And one of the things I've learned through this whole thing is I've been trying through COVID to share my message. And I know you're like this, is that you want to give as much as you can to help others around you. But I'll tell you, when I put myself out there, it's kind of scary. So then when I feel that I'm afraid of it, I go, okay, now let me just take a moment and breathe, and let me see if is it a right action? Is it something that's I believe is good to do? And if it is, that and I'm still afraid of it, I'm going to lean into it. And I think that you have a great barometer. And so it sounds like we know that we can go out in certain situations. We have good objective evidence, and then we have that other piece that you're talking about where
Right.
you have that fear that's not really based on real evidence, it's false evidence.
You know,
So
and
you
your
could,
body is experiencing stress, right? So we have our own cognitive component where, you know, people experience looping thoughts and worry, and there's people that still have, you know, just truly a worry about infection. I think some people are just feeling the anxiety and don't even know why they're feeling anxiety, and that's why there's a lot of panic attacks. People are experiencing at a higher rate, and panic attacks are just your body's way of saying, hello, I got something going on and I don't like it and I need you to support me, not with medication, but with actually therapy and different things to calm the nervous system down. So, you know, we have to pay attention to the signals, right? And you are so right. Nobody in our country likes to feel uncomfortable, but these emotions are important and they are signals, right, that our body experiences some level of uncomfortableness because it's an alert system. It doesn't mean you shove it down. It means you pay attention to it, you experience it, you deal with it, and you move on. You have to learn the lessons. If you keep shoving things down with some Xanax, it's going to come out in another way. And that's, I think, the hard part. So many people wind up coming to us in Tom. You know, we deal with people with chronic disease states and, you know, their treatment failures often. They tried so many other things, you know, we have so many crossover patients with infectious disease. Yeah. And, you know, why do we work together? Because the mental health component often is a barrier, whether it's emotional trauma or just high levels of anxiety, your nervous system can't respond the way that it's supposed to. And that is so critical in any form of healing, whether it's healing from disease, physical disease, or mental health.
Well, it's interesting because as you've been talking about the reentry panic syndrome, and then even just what you just said, the thing that really strikes me is that a lot of our chronic Lyme patients, our chronic Bartonella patients, our patients with mold exposure, pandas who can't seem to get better. And this is like you were saying, this is probably one of the reasons we work so well together is they become isolated. And so a lot of us are talking about this isolation as if, oh, the person, they've become their disease and they've decided that like this is part of their identity. But I think it's for a lot of people, some people go that route, but a lot of people, it's their only like protection. And it's like COVID. It's like, I'm afraid to take that next step because every time I've done it in the past, it's been uncertain or it's been fearful or I've had a bad outcome. So it's almost like people with chronic Lyme and chronic Bartonella have, reentry panic syndrome.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, also too, I mean, there's so many layers to people with infectious disease from, I was talking to somebody a week ago on how, they have provider PTSD, so if I'm like, I need to go and do this, they're like, oh my gosh, every time I've gone, I've had a hard time. So, we store things that prevent us, right, from moving forward. And so, with reentry panic syndrome, and I mean, it's just surprising, every feeling is valid. And I want to say, like, if somebody's feeling anxious about coming back in the world, that's okay. It's not okay when it prevents you from returning to a job or, doing things in life that you're supposed to be doing, or it's really making you feel so uncomfortable that it's interfering with your daily function, even in quarantine, right? But the world is reopening. And you are right, we're all going to be infected in some way, shape, or form. And that unknown part, I think, is another reason that we're feeling such a level of anxiety, because we know one of the best ways to manage uncomfortable feelings is to have a level of control, right? Yes. So we can't control if we're getting the infection per se, but there's a lot of things we can do to control to prepare for it. Right. And that is so critical because you and I are always talking about the platform to healing. I talk about the eight pillars in my new book, It's Going to Be Okay, nice. In my course, but it's the same. There's a certain foundation, and if you take care of yourself, including stress, right, that you're going to be way more prepared for anything in life.
Yeah, and I think that's the important part here is like how so much of how we get better is what we choose to do with what we have control over. And like I've asked a lot of people, I say, well, are you afraid of getting influenza? And there has not been one person who says, yes, I'm afraid of getting influenza. They're just like, I'm going to get it or I'm not going to get it. I'm going to get a vaccine or I'm not going to get a vaccine. If I get flu, I'll be fine, unless I'm not. But no one thinks about that part because it's been around and we know more about it. But legitimately, minus a few small cases, COVID-19 looks the same way. Right. I mean, I'm not saying there's not bad outcomes, and don't get me wrong, but what I'm saying is if you want to look at the evidence of like what reentry means, we should be objective. Do I have a high risk person in my family? My father-in-law, his heart's not doing so hot, and he's in his mid 70s, if we transmitted SARS-CoV-2 to him, that might be a death sentence. But if you and I hang out and one of us we haven't had it like we think we did, we probably have flu-like illness. I mean, most of my patients who have had it have gotten over it in a couple of days to a week. And the thing that I think what you just said is so important for people to understand is the people in my practice, and I'm wondering if you've seen this too, who have been doing the protocols to help them recover from some other chronic problem, when they get COVID-19, they're like, oh, it was a breeze. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't anything like what other people
100%,
said.
100%. Absolutely. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, and being that we're in the Northeast, we all, know so many people that have had it or even at least suspect they've had it and they've recovered, I mean, I know people that were in high risk that have passed from it. And they're elderly and we're in a high risk pool, and we shouldn't minimize that. But when you're healthy, it's very rare to be in the low risk pool and to have death as a result.
Right.
And even to have more severe cases. So, that anxiety that starts, there's so much. So people are in a totally jacked up, anxious, hyper state, in the nervous system. And guess what's going to happen? It's going to be much more likely that you will get more symptomatic COVID or any other infection, because your nervous system is so activated. So pulling yourself out of that stress state is paramount for both physical and mental health. And in preparing yourself to re-enter the world, because guess what? People need to leave their house. I mean, they do. They have to get out. You can't just be there for 6 months. I mean, Dr. Tom and I do believe there'll be other periods of quarantine, maybe shorter periods. But this isn't going away anytime soon. So people need to find a tolerance. You're going to be uncomfortable, but can you create a window of tolerance where you're not so uncomfortable that you're paralyzed, right? Or having panic attacks. And so in the reps protocol, it's very simple, and you need to practice it. It's respiration, it's envisioning positivity and stress management. And, respiration is simple breathing. And so doing whatever breath you want to do, a 4-4 breath, a 5-7-8 breath, 4-7-8 breath, you have to be mindful, you have to practice it. And why? Because you're regulating your nervous system. And it's so important. And then you have to visualize yourself leaving your house and being successful. I think that's the other part, is people are spending time in a worry loop, seeing like, oh my gosh, I'm going out, and then they see themselves sick. So stop that. See yourself going out to the park, doing well, feeling a little uncomfortable, but being okay, and then coming home and doing that. And really just being very positive. So when we make negative statements out loud, like, that's going to be awful, and somebody's going to cough on me, and you say that to yourself, your subconscious hears that. So flip that dialogue.
Right. Now the thing about about negative thinking and negative speech is, the negative is a survival instinct. It's a way to protect us. The things that we don't know, but we've sort of overinterpreted it in modern times, right? Because the idea of fight or flight, and protecting ourselves, the idea of being fearful of the unknown is, back in the day, the unknown might really kill you. So now, but the difference is, they were like, is this bad or not bad? We assume it's bad. We try to prove it's good. Now we just assume it's bad and we let it ruin our lives. So,
and it's our subconscious, because it's a primitive reflex.
Right. So it's not a bad thing. It's what you do with it.
Right. And it is like, I always think of, when I think of positive thinking and breaking negative talk, I always think of Saturday Night Live, and I forget who, I think it was Phil Hartman, that would go in front of the screen and be like, damn it, I'm good enough, I'm beautiful. And
oh, Deep Thoughts with Jack Handy.
Oh, okay. Right, okay. And he would say that to himself. And, and anybody who knows me, I just declare stuff all the time. Like, I'm like, this is what's happening.
And it does.
Happening. And thankfully I have friends with like Dr. Tom, who's like, yeah, it is, because other people are like, okay. But when we say these positive statements out loud, like, literally our cells hear it. And it's just much more likely to happen instead of that component, doing that. Well, and then the last part is stress management. Like, you have to actively do things every day. Dr. Tom and I do stuff every day. Every day we do something for ourselves. And it doesn't have to be, I wish it was a massage every day, closed until the end of the month. But it's not. But it's something, because we live in a high stress world. There's a lot going on, as you said, like, just changes in the conversations, the uncomfortable conversations that are happening, with racism, which are awesome. There's just a lot going on in the world, a lot of change. And even if things are positive, with change comes stress. So your body knows no difference between good and bad stress. It's just going to react. So we need to be mindful and take care of ourselves, both for physical health and mental health. You know, they always talk about mind, body, and spirit, but somehow mental health never wants to link to physical health. They're all connected. It's very, very important.
You can't separate them, you know, and it's interesting too with the, you know, the way you're talking about positivity and envisioning is one of the things that is interesting is that people who are around you, like it's infectious because you're like, you know, like just even, you know, as we through our careers and our relationship have talked more, I'm like, wait, I can do that too. So a lot of the things that I've had inside of me that I've wanted to achieve and I've been about ready to go for, it's infectious when you're around people. The people around you influence you more than you know. So parents, even when your kids are acting like they're not paying attention, they really are. You have so much
They're
influence over them,
paying attention all the time, Todd.
right? Dude, and Ro, like the other thing is the people you surround yourself with. So one of the things that I just really felt compelled to say when you were talking about that is find yourself support that's you know allowing you to achieve your goal in whatever it is. And if it's getting out of the house, that's where Dr. Roseann and all of her programs are helpful because it's like you need to have people around you who are saying yes, it's possible, and not just what we see on the news, you know. And it's so easy to pick up my phone in the morning and go for the breaking news. The reason the breaking news is almost always negative is because that's the thing our brain clicks onto. But what you're saying is we have the ability to make a shift and choose what we focus on.
And you have to be intentful about it. Like these things just don't happen, right? So, you know, I definitely was raised by people who didn't put limits on me. And you hang out with me, I don't
You
really
know
know
that.
there's limits on anything, right? I'm like, what do you mean you can't do that? You know, okay, algebra, I stop at, can't do that. I try my best at that. Parallel parking is never going to happen for me. But it's okay. I'm okay with that. Nobody has to be perfect. You should never have perfection. You know, that's just not attainable. But, you know, it is really powerful. You know, I always use the analogy of like a sports person, you know, somebody who's an athlete, they don't walk in there. We know athletes, it's about mindset and ability. Why isn't it the same for us with health or relationships or jobs? It's the same. And all the successful people in the world visualize and spend time, you know, seeing the positive, talking positively to themselves, you know, and you're so right. I mean, our kids pick up everything, right? And you know, my little guy is dyslexic, and you know, it's a gift, right? Dyslexia is absolutely a gift. It's so
Oh,
creative.
for sure.
And every once in a while, I hear little negative little pop-ups from him, and you know, even though his dad and I are super positive and we just talk like that all the time because that's just who we are, you know, you have to practice it and reinforce it. So when I catch him being negative and saying things, I address it and talk to him about it and find out, why are you feeling like that? Is there some things that he can do? Because I want to empower him to make that change, but also to validate, okay, this was hard for you. Maybe we need to be reading more or whatever it is.
Right.
You know, those challenges or whatever. I just noticed he's a little more sensitive with things that he doesn't do well some of the times, not all the time. He's not as sensitive. He's not a kid that's easily upset. So when he is, I have to stop, right? But role modeling, you know, we are not perfect parents. We should never expect ourselves to be perfect parents, but shifting and being very intentful about using positive language is absolutely such a definer for children. And you can break generational negativity, right? Like so many of us, Dr. Tom and I were in a workshop about abundance and money, right? And everyone learns their money habits from their parents, right? And a lot of people have fear-based beliefs about, you know, money, parenting, just relationships, anything. You pass that down. So it is absolutely breakable, and there's a way to do that. And yes, you know, a lot of this work can be done on your own, and for sure, always do as much as you can on your own. But you're right, some people are stuck and they need clinical care.
Yeah.
And that's what we do, and we're happy to do it. And what makes us very different, you know, we just take a very different approach to mental health.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I mean, I've certainly had the pleasure, and I'm so grateful that you've been able to help me on some of the really stuck people, because a lot of people think, like you're saying, the body, mind, and spirit. There are three words that are necessary to break apart a unity. And the reason it's necessary is so we can talk about it and we can study it and we can get better at it. But in the end, we have to remember to put it back together. One of the
Yeah.
things too, as a parent, though, I think is so critical is that I, like you, I'm not perfect. So when I'm not perfect, I take a deep breath, and that deep breath may happen an hour later, 5 minutes later, or maybe even a day or two later. And then I actually talk to my kid about it, and I try to model the fact that I can own up to my not perfection and say, this is what I was feeling. How did this make you feel? Okay, now this is what I'm doing to change it. And then it's like amazing how it all changes. And so I just think it's so important to understand that it's not about
So
being perfect.
important. So important. And you know, and to talk about it and not be like try to shove it away that you did something wrong. And I do the same time. I mean, that's just a good thing because you know that so many people in our world feel like they have to be perfect. I mean, look, you had celebrities paying to get their kids into these Ivy League schools, like that had to be, you know, and they didn't have the skills to get in there, right? But it became such a something that was so important to them. For what? For how people view you, right?
Right.
And then what does that do? It feeds inadequacy in your child. So perfection is not attainable. And people who go to Ivy Leagues aren't perfect. But God bless you if you get in.
I'm gonna plead the fifth on
So
that
I'm
one.
not knocking you or whatever, but you know, just know most CEOs actually didn't finish school or went to state schools. Just saying.
Yeah, take a listen to some Gary V. You'll
Yeah,
see what he thinks about that. So hey,
yeah.
one of the
Yeah, and the number one common characteristic of millionaires is dyslexia. So I just like to share that with people. 40%
right.
of
Well,
them.
and so the thing is, it's kind of like COVID-19. There's a lot we don't know. It's kind of like Lyme. There's a lot we don't know. PANS,
Mhm.
dyslexia. It's not what you have. It's what you do with what you have.
And taking that moment and being in that moment and making the best out of it, right? And you know, some people are born a glass half empty and some people are born a glass half full. I mean, I see it all the time. I see it in my own kids. If we have a propensity, right? And like you said, our brain is to focus on novel, negative things that's what it's designed to do, leftover primitive caveman.
Exactly.
But with intention, we can break that. So even if you or your child is more of like, that's not that catastrophe, I call it catastrophizers, like they always think the worst or whatnot, you can unwind that. And it's that daily, you know, practice. And for some people, you know, we use all these awesome tools like neurofeedback and biofeedback and PMF. And why? Because some people's nervous system are so clinically jacked up, as I like to say, there's such a hyperactive state
Yeah.
that they're always going in fight, flight, or freeze. Always, boom, boom. And the more you live in this hyper state, the more you react to everything. So we use those tools to bring people down so that they can actually use their rational thought, take moments, put the brakes on, whether, you know, and this is things like when adults do this for themselves, they're doing it obviously for themselves, but they're also doing this to break those patterns for their children, right? So many parents come to me because they're bringing their kid in, they're like, hey, my kid's a lot easier and pays attention, and then they realize this is me. I need to do this for
Right.
myself. I wish more parents did things for themselves, even if it was as a motivator to be a better role model and managing stress
Right.
from their kids.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that, like, you know, you mentioned kind of like break family habits and stuff, and on the podcast I talk a lot with different people about epigenetics and how the things that I'm doing can actually not only change my current life and change the future, but can actually make changes in the energetics of the emotions from the past. And like, you know, one of the things I talk a ton about is like my dad and I mean, my dad and his family had their things, right? And, you know, he died a couple years back. And our whole, you know, the struggle was real, so to speak, like throughout our relationship. It was so hard. And we, thankfully, before the end, things kind of got on a good even keel. But man, there were years of just hell. And the thing is, though, like a couple weekends ago, I realized I was like, my dad did the best he could,
Yeah.
right? But with his resources, and he wanted to do more, but he didn't know what to do and he didn't have other resources. He went to everybody, but they couldn't help him. So I was getting mad at him, but it was like, well, he did try his best. He just needed a little something extra. Maybe he needed to come see you or something. But the thing was, it was like, then I saw it in a different light. And I said, you know, all the effort I'm making now, I can do it with him, for his family, and for me and my family, rather than just trying to break it. Because I feel like I took my thinking to the next level, and I want to make it that positive shift of, I'm trying to break a habit, a pattern from our family, but I'm not trying to do it so that I can break free from the family. I'm doing it to heal all of us. And everybody before me did the very best they could, even if that best sucked ass. And now, but I'm in this place because of all the struggles they had and I've had. And now together we're going to make, and man, the power you get when you stop being pissed off at everybody else and take freaking responsibility for being able to do it together.
I mean, that's just a really beautiful way to look at it, because when we let those feelings like be our chains, right? Because we're pissed that, your dad, your mom, your aunt, whatever, did whatever. And instead to just say, this is who they are, they're doing the best they can. And then, I'm all about setting boundaries in relationships. So having
That's
boundaries.
how we got back on the right track too, is I did that. Word, right? That's what you need to do.
Yeah, and just because you're blood, I'm telling you this as an Italian woman, does not mean you get to have a relationship either.
Right.
So, it's all about respect, right? So you create a boundary that's respectful for both of you, right? Like, I have certain members of like my Italian family, we can only talk about recipes because that's the only thing that's not volatile.
Right, right.
So I'm like, well, I'll just talk about recipes for 3 hours when I see her at the family thing, and I just think that's okay, where some people want to get right into it. But, to know, like, even my own father, I mean, the poor guy was beaten in his sleep by his mother, like, who does that to
Right.
somebody? And, she did classic abuser things where she turned the other children against him, and those children, listening, don't even talk to him, and they don't even know why. He's a lovely person, and he's tried really hard, but like, to think, when we talk about trauma and those early trauma, they call it developmental trauma, because you're in early development, you're supposed to get TLC, you're supposed to cry and be cared for and not violated or abused. And so when that happens, I'm very lucky that my father he broke the abuse cycle on his end. But you could see that it was a struggle for him. He became that classic abused child where he became ultra successful to prove that he was worthy. So he doesn't like to think of himself as abused. He just thinks of it as a person of a different generation, that his mother was doing the best she could, because it was during wartime and there was a lot of stuff. It should be a Lifetime movie, actually, his story. But I share this story with people, which I've actually never shared, is that because people go through a lot of shit, and it's real. And the power of your mind is incredible. And you have to start from that moment to say, no, I can control this. And this is what I can do. And there's parts to that. You have to sleep. You have to eat well. You have to create boundaries with people in relationships to reduce your stress levels, right? So get rid of toxicity in your life. But you have to prepare and protect your nervous system. And that you can do through meditation, you can do through yoga, you can do through breath work and neurofeedback, biofeedback. But you got to do it, and you got to do something every day. Right. There's no magic wand for healing. It's very intentful.
I think that it's so critical, and that's a piece I really want to talk about. And I also, though, have this question in my head. I'm like, how did you, like, because the thing is, I think that, story is so important. Like, everybody's like, that I talked to is like, everything in my life changed. I was able to make a much bigger impact on the world. I helped more people. I had more friends. I felt better about myself. on and on, the list of all positive stuff happen when they start to share their story. And I think the story really helps because it's like we're just all human beings going through the
All
same
human
bullshit.
beings. Yeah.
But how did I mean, how the hell does your dad? Because like
Yeah.
this is interesting for me to hear this story, everybody, because when you talk to Rose, she's just like, oh, you know what, like my parents, they were no limits. They just supported me, and it was this great environment, and we would just create stuff, and we had abundance, and we wanted to share abundance with others. And you hang out with her, and she's like, oh, here's all the, I'm going to make sure you have everything you want because I make everything I want, and you need to have that too, and everybody can do that. So it's like, but then I'm sitting down here listening to this, like, oh, he got beat in his sleep, and his family
Yeah.
doesn't even talk to him, and it's like, okay, so
How does that happen?
how does it happen? Because we
Yeah.
all want to know the secret sauce.
Well, the secret sauce came from within him. Like what makes one person, so like even in abuse, right? Abuse cycles, right? So physical, sexual abuse, those things tend to pattern, right? So something within him, right? In myself, I can tell you that I'm super resilient because I have a lot of guides in my life. And I am very connected to my intuitiveness. And we
Yeah,
all have intuition. And because I was empowered to be who I was as a kid, I was able to connect as a child and stay connected because all children are connected to intuition, but we tell kids to turn it off. Like, just
for
do
sure.
this, do this, do this. Well, not my family. So I can't answer the question. All I can tell you is my father has an internal resilience. And what we know about resilience is it starts with being able to tolerate frustration. So he's a thinker and a problem solver. He's also a genius. He speaks 5 languages, and he's just
Damn.
this guy that's like I inherited a personality from him. In that I'm like, I'm gonna do it. Like, worst thing you're gonna tell me is tell
Do
me
you
no.
have to do it with the accent and everything?
Yeah, I know, right? Oh my
You're
God,
gonna
he's
do
got
it.
the total tank. My parents are off the boat, from Italy. They came, and he was poor. He didn't have shoes. I mean, it's his life started out. His father was a prisoner of war for 8 years. I mean, like it was when somebody, and I have so many people in my life that had horrible beginnings in life, and they are resilient people. And when we look at trauma research, we don't really know why one person becomes resilient and why one doesn't. But we do know when people view things positively instead of negatively, there's a dramatic difference in their life. They have much better mental health. They live longer. So there was something in him that, like I think was he 82 or 83? He still works 5 or 6 days a week. He owns a massive company. Like he's just like,
Wow.
gonna do it. And is a worker, right? So he's a worker that puts a lot of effort into things. So he does not view himself as being abused, and he probably would not like me sharing this conversation. But I think it's an important conversation that, whatever happens in your life, it's like, do this. And then, he married my mother, who came from a very loving family. And my, grandfather, very much the same, very much like, you can do anything kind of thing. So I think that even though my father grew up with all these limits, right, the two of them, he and my mother, who were very different kinds of people, really just created their own world. They came over as immigrants, and as many immigrants do. You're isolated. Our entire family still lives in Italy. We don't have relatives here. And they just said, this is what we're going to do. And they really did the American immigrant dream, that we're coming here, we're going to do better for our children than we did for ourselves. And, again, he did that rare thing that some people, and I meet so many people that experience abuse, and just say, I'm not going to let it define me. And it actually becomes this thing that catapults him. But
Right.
resilient, positive, and
It sounds like he created an environment around him,
yeah,
right? That was supported what he needed.
yeah,
And I find that a lot of people, like even my wife and I, we're very different people, but it's like
yeah,
a perfect melding. because Jill and I, you know, provide the thing that the other person doesn't need. So it's like we're not looking for ourselves, we're looking for almost like that "you complete me" idea. But it's like,
Yeah,
because we need that, like you said, that positive environment.
we
I
do. And you know, Tom, you talked about like you and I were so lucky we're in this group with people that are nothing but great human beings who are lifters. And we all need that in our lives, right? Like we need these positive relationships. Family is family, and sometimes relationships are difficult, but you can set boundaries that feel good to you. And I can tell you, if you're dealing with another person in a family member who isn't taking care of themselves or difficult, those boundaries will help them. We feel uncomfortable setting boundaries, but when you give them boundaries, I'm telling you, they're going to be better behaved, just
Yeah,
like a
it's
kid.
so true, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it builds your relationship. Like with my old
Build
man,
your
I said,
relationship.
dude, I realized that there was a point in my life where it was like 3.5 days and we were fried. So, because we didn't live near each other, but if I went for a week, we hated each other. If I went for 3.5 days, I came in late one day and I left the other morning real early. That gave me about 3.5 days of chilling. We loved each other so much. And then it kind of grew a little bit. And there was a time where I needed to do something for him and I could spend 2 weeks with him. Then I went back to my 3.5 to 4 days. And it's amazing because my relationship went from one where we couldn't handle each other to we were calling each other, we were having fun.
Oh,
A year or
Tom.
two after he died, like I was looking through my computer and there was one day we were trying to do Zoom together and he was learning it and I took a picture and it just overwhelmed my heart because like I called up and what used to happen was I would call up and I'd be like, "Hey dad, is mom there? Because I had a question for her." And he was like, you know, "Oh no, she's out or whatever. All right, bye." And or we talked for like 1 second, and then we were just like chit chatting. I was like, "Hey, you want to get on? You know, you want to hang out and talk on the Zoom or whatever, or Skype or whatever the hell it was?" And I had this picture because like my mom was out, and my dad and I talked for like 90 minutes. That was longer than I probably talked to him my whole life. You
Yeah.
know, when I
Yeah,
wasn't
it
forced
starts
to.
to change, you know,
Yeah,
because each person, it reduces that tension level, right? Just like the person in my life that I can only talk about recipes, I create that boundary. If I start going outside of the boundary, I really do run a high risk of an argument. So now, so I
right.
like recipes.
And what's your goal? Is your goal to have an argument? Is your goal to have some
No, I
quality time with your
want,
family member?
you know, and that's the other thing. Are you going to really resolve something that happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? You know, you're probably not. I mean, only unless all parties want to change,
Right.
ain't nothing going to happen. So you can cry about it and get mad at them and do all that, you know, but you start with finding a respectful place, right? That's what I always say to people. Like, I let people in my life when they're respectful. When they're not respectful, oh, let me tell you, you're out.
Right.
And it just has to be that way. You always should just treat people with respect and kindness, you know. And if you don't like somebody, that's okay too. You know, if they have to be in your life, find a neutral thing, or try to respectfully avoid them in some way that's okay, you know.
Right. Well, it is. It's just, yeah, we do need to create those boundaries that give us permission to, I mean, you know, there's the whole like little saying like you're only, you know, in relationships, you only stay with somebody till about like either this close to abusing you as much as you abuse yourself. And it's like, what's really interesting is you start putting boundaries. It's hard to put boundaries on other people because we don't put boundaries on ourselves. We don't say, "No, Tom, you can't talk. We're not talking about that today, right? We're not going to treat ourselves like shit today."
Yeah,
And
and
it's
we treat ourselves like shit all the time. I mean,
right. That's what I mean.
negative self-talk and things that we do to ourselves. Nobody is as cruel to ourselves as we are, right? And
Exactly.
so easy to let those things creep in. And so when you take care of yourself, like we talk about self-care all the time, and people minimize it and they always think it's like a day at the spa. I mean, who doesn't love a day at the spa? But really, self-care is about those things that you do for yourself, right? Those little things that move the dial and remind you on a daily basis, whether it's a gratitude journal or praying or, you know, making sure I do this every day or whatever. You have to do that. You have to be kind to yourself. And we're all just trying so hard, I think. And even the people in the world that are nasty, because let me tell you, there's some nasty people in the world, they're few. And they're often people that are struggling with anxiety, and they hate themselves. They're just caught up in a negativity. So
Right, and they treat everybody
starts
else
from you.
so horribly.
Yeah,
Imagine what they're doing to themselves.
they're, that is absolutely the truth.
I mean,
When
I'm
it
just
comes
anyway,
back to them,
and so I always tell parents and spouses and friends, you got to take care of you first. That is not being conceited. That is taking, I mean, I want to, if I want to give 110% or more or whatever, 100% to my daughter or to my wife, I can only do that if I first know how to do that for me. It's impossible for me to take care of somebody else, right?
100%. 100%. And if you're not balanced and grounded, you're going to attract more people that are not balanced and grounded. It's just the law of physics and all that stuff.
No
You're going
kidding.
to attract, right? Like attracts like.
So one of the things that I find is like, and I want to see if you give us some practical tips, because it's great for us to talk about self-care and put ourselves for all this stuff.
Yeah.
But I know that you had mentioned visualization as part of, sort of the exposure and the positivity steps in there. How do you, I, I've been an athlete my whole life, and I know lots of athletes visualize. And I do know that the athletes who visualize better, in quotes, better, tend to be better and do better. But what I also know is that visualization is hard as hell. Because like I'm going and I'm running and I fall down, or I'm going to take the hockey puck and put it in the net and somehow I miss it. So what are
Yeah.
tips? How do you visualize? Because that
Yeah.
seems to be
So
a core
it's
thing
a
that you
great
need to do.
question. So first of all, you have to be intentfully, take the intent and actually do it a little bit every day. So it can be anything. So I'm just going to use the example of my I have 3 books, but one is a big book, and how I did it, and how I did it really fast because all my
It's
friends
kind
are
of
so
mind
great.
blowing. So this is a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's also how I wrote my dissertation in 3 days. So it's okay. Don't worry about it. It got accepted. But
You guys are going to learn quantum leaps right here, man.
is my book. I actually spent more time visualizing what I wanted in it. And I hate to use something big, but I'll use something big and then we'll use something small. So I spent more time visualizing what I wanted in the book. So you always start with the end. I see the book, I see the title, I see kind of the general what I want. It's about reducing and reversing symptoms. That's what the book's about. Then I was like, what do I need in it? And then I broke it down visually. Then I spent time like, okay, yeah, okay, sleep, what do people need to know? And I literally just ran through it. And then I would spend time a little bit every day. So I do a lot of visualizing before I actually get out of bed and when I go to bed. Like the rest of the time I'm a spaz. So,
True
so
story.
yeah, true story. So just being calm about it. So it can be little things. So like even tomorrow, I've already started visualizing my day tomorrow. So now in the summer on Wednesdays I work from home. So I visualize what my day, what are my things I have to do. And then I saw myself swimming in the pool in the afternoon. So then I tell my kid, I have to do this until this time because he's a Virgo and needs a schedule. And then I was like, we're gonna do this. And I see myself there. And so those simple things, I literally visualize all the time
So
from
you're saying
little
I have to
tasks.
practice this for it to work right.
Practice it. It's just part of what I was, you know what I mean? Like I was in high school, I never was paying attention. I was either reading a book or visualizing. It served me well.
Right, and it has. And so for someone like myself who like I love thinking about stuff, but it's like as I work to, through my life to put it more into practice, how do you I mean,
But
I'm
I
assuming
see
if
it. Thinking can translate into worry. So I actually see myself doing it. It's a different concept. So like I see myself at the pool totally tomorrow afternoon.
now,
Which
do
is
you also
not
do
like
the feeling part?
I feel it. I feel the heat on my feet. So you add the sensory piece, then I, feel myself swimming. And that's just what I do. So adding a sensory component. So like for an athlete, getting the goal, right? They're spending time thinking about it. what they're feeling it going through, and even before when you get on the field, what they're doing. I've worked with a lot of athletes. They always come into me for concussions, and then we do
Right.
peak performance.
And then performance enhancement.
Yeah, then we do performance stuff. I do a lot of stuff with executives too, which is really always super fun. They always come in for their ADD kid or something, and then I'm like, they want to know how and the other reason I process fast, let's be honest, paleo, and I've done like 800 sessions of neuro, So, but you have to take that moment right before the action, and again, see the outcome, feel the outcome, right? So there's a different component because we can slip into a worry pattern. So even me talking about the chapters in my book, I actually see the title. I don't think about, it has to have this, like I just keep visualizing, and I see a lot of images.
So what if I make
practice.
a mistake? You know what I mean? Like, 'cause I think a lot of people are would be asking, what if I made a mistake? What if I'm trying, how do I
hold the end product, and then I make mistakes. You just you learn from your mistakes. You're like, okay, I see myself doing this, and this is what broke down. Now I see what I need to do to fix it. So, that's why when you visualize and you see the end product, the mistakes are only learning to get there. Your routes can always be different. It's not always one route. So it's that intentful practice, right? And also visualization has to be authentic, right? I always joke that you can't just visualize your winning lotto. You have to be like, what is real in your life, You can visualize yourself playing lotto, but you better play a lot.
Right. If you want to, you have to practice it. Right. And it's interesting because it's like, I just was thinking, I was like, even when I added the feeling and the smell and the sound of a hockey rink, you could get the puck to go in a lot more. But then I also, as you're saying, a lot of our, what we would call a mistake or improper visualization that went off this way in baseball. I mean, people talk about it all the time. If you hit the ball, 3 out of 10 pitches, you're world famous, you're in the Hall of Fame type of thing. I mean, who bats 300 or 400? So I think that if you're successful that commonly, and some of the biggest entrepreneurs, the biggest companies in the whole world, they fail 9 times and they hit it out of the park once. That's a 10% success rate. But we view them as amazing, but it's because they practice.
We have more failure than we have successes, but I do believe very much, and also the visualization part kind of lets you get rid of things that maybe you think you should be doing or parts of the process. It allows you to practice in your mind before you actually take action. And when you focus on the visual and the feeling, that's adding that sensory component for me gets rid of any worry, right? And not that worry is bad. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to do this. I was thinking in this moment of COVID, I went through all my things that I wanted to do. Of course, I have all these visuals for them, Google Sheets,
of course,
and all this stuff and whatever. And I was had to change what I thought was most important, and it was absolutely the right thing. And then I was able to be like, this doesn't feel like this fits in, this doesn't. And so it's really, really helpful. And I'm also just a grounded person. I only do things that feel right. And that's always just served me well in a lot of ways, both positive and safety. I've gotten myself out of a lot of unsafe situations by listening to my gut. And those are really important. So it's got to match up too. I mean, that's the other part of it. And you talk to so many successful people. I mean, I just have met so many people. Being the daughter of immigrants, I often connect with other immigrants, and just to hear their stories of just pulling themselves out of things, and they have a vision, and they put effort behind it, right? So that's the other part. Effort.
It's interesting. Everybody talks about the American dream, and I'm like, everybody who seems to achieve the American dream is an immigrant.
Yeah.
And it just dawned on me, it's probably because they actually envisioned the damn dream.
They spend all this time visualizing. But
they have an actual dream, and they get it.
Yeah, and a lot of immigrants work their ass off.
Well, right. So it's so all of us who want to make a change in our health and our relationships, in our
visualize
finances.
it. You want your child to be well, visualize it. Stop visualizing the catastrophe, you know? So like I call my book and program It's Gonna Be Okay, because it's the first thing I tell people because they need to hear it, because as a mother of more than one kid who has issues, all you do is worry about them. And if you get, you can feel a worry, you can experience it, but you can't live there. You can't be like, oh my God, they're gonna live in my basement. Well, guess what? They're probably gonna live in your basement if you keep saying that. You
Right.
know, so change it. And if they're really difficult kids, which I get on a lot of levels, then you have to do more of the visualizing on a day-to-day basis and spend it more on the day, see the overall outcome being positive, but maybe you need to do more of that individual work.
Right. It sounds amazing. And I mean, it's so much hope here. And I mean, I feel like we could go on forever talking about all these things. We definitely have some, lots more to talk about. So we'll have to do it again soon because, you know, it's interesting. It's like when I look at it, it's like, if you want to achieve a dream, think about it, visualize it, create the dream, put it down on paper, keep it in your mind. And then the second thing that Dr. Roseann just said that I think is so critical is you work your ass off. You know, it's like, if you go back to The Secret, it's like ask, believe, receive. It's like you ask, but the believing part is actually doing the damn work to get it, not just sit on my butt and it shows up.
Yeah, absolutely. You know,
And then be grateful.
It doesn't just show up. You got to work your ass off. You know what I mean? So,
right. Same thing with
I learned
health.
that from my parents. Let me tell you that. We were up, you know, child labor laws weren't really that much in place, but, you know, we were up painting apartments at 12 o'clock in the morning, sleeping on the floor and stuff like that. You know, it was great. I didn't know that you shouldn't work your ass off all the time.
Yeah, but it's funny though, because so many people, I could just see it now. So many people are going to be like, oh, that sucked so bad. And you're like, it was great. I didn't even know. It was amazing. And look what it allowed me to.
Very fondly. Of course, my mother always had great food when we did these things, you know, because that's all right. But, you know, it taught me to work. I didn't look at it as a negative ever. You know, we were connected as a family doing things, and my parents always were so upfront about what they were doing, how much it cost, what they needed to do. And, you know, it's made me be a phenomenal business person. So, I never, you know, I don't shy away from hard work and pushing myself and all of those things. But we can achieve so much more, and we don't fully use our mind, right? And we hear mindset and all these other things, but you can, like you said, there's a lot of hope in it because we all can control that. We can do that. I talk about these things with my kids. You know, my parents demonstrated them, but now I understand the secret sauce. So I share it, right? So it's important to not only model, but vocalize and give that metacognitive piece. Like, oh, okay, you want to do this, so let's do that. All right, you know, what do we need to get there? What does it look like? And all of that. So it's a good thing. Awesome. There's a lot we can do. Always be, you know, I'm always positive.
Absolutely. And if you guys want to learn more, so I'm sure everyone's going to want to get a little of your secret sauce and to get a little more infected with this positive vibe that you've got. How do they find you, learn more about you? And then also, I know with the books coming out, I mean, where are they going to be able to be on the wait list to be the first to sign up for it?
Yeah, so our course is up, and you can find me on social. Just search Dr. Roseann, and it's Dr. Roseann or Dr. Roseann Associates. But I'm www.drroseann.com or childrensmentalhealth.com. So we do have our course, and the book should be out in the fall.
Nice.
So, or books. You'll see.
So good. Yeah, I believe it. And you'll see how, I mean, Roseann's very prolific. So, and such high quality stuff. Always a pleasure to have a conversation. And then I'll make sure I link to everything so that people can make sure that they can get to drroseann.com. Thanks so much for making the time to do this.
Always love
blowing my mind as always, and a super fun time.
I know, always. We can have fun anywhere. So such a great conversation. We went a lot of ways that I hope helped people.
Yeah, me too. All right. Yeah. Have a great day. Thanks for listening. Don't miss out on a single thing. Subscribe to our podcast and then join me at tommorecroft.com.